Checkmating with the two bishops is really not that difficult. All you have to do to learn is watch this video and then practice the endgame on your own or with a friend a couple of times until you get the technique down. After that, you'll pretty much be set for a very long time. The first thing you guys need to remember is that you need to force the enemy king into one of the four corners of the board. That's the only way you'll be able to deliver checkmate. And I'm sure you've already seen this idea when trying to checkmate with the king and queen or the king and rook, right? It's always easier if the enemy king is in one of the corners of the board. Basically because it has less squares that it can go to there, which means it's easier to checkmate. Right now, I'm just going to play out a sample endgame and explain to you guys all the basic ideas and principles that you need to know in order to be able to do this yourself. The first thing I'm going to do is just bring my king towards the enemy king. Okay, simple enough. If you're on the other side of this endgame and you're trying to survive, you need to keep your king in the center of the board as much as you can. That's the only way to make things somewhat difficult for your opponent. So both kings come to the center, and let's say we get this position. Okay, now my king can't come any closer, so it's time I use the two bishops that I have extra, right? And I'm going to start with this move here. What I like about this endgame is that you don't actually have to give any checks until the very end if you want to checkmate the king. All you need to do is take away squares from the king so that it can't stay in the center of the board and it's eventually going to be pushed into one of the corners. So here I'm taking away the important e6 square, which means that the king cannot stay in the center of the board. If the king goes back to e7, then I'll bring my king one step forward, and I'm that much closer to forcing the enemy king to the edge of the board. So let's say the king comes around this way. Now I'm going to bring the other bishop in to f4. Now I'm controlling the d6 square. As you can see, the two bishops work together very well. When you control both colors, you're creating this laser beam that has already made the top right of the board completely inaccessible to the enemy king. A really fundamental thing that you guys have to remember in order to be successful in this endgame is that black always has to make a move. What I mean is you're not allowed to pass a turn in chess. Always have to move. And that's useful information to us because if we constantly ask ourselves, where's my opponent going to go next, then it becomes very easy to determine which squares we need to take away. Let's say the king comes here, and we're trying to figure out what move to do next. Right? The move I want to play is bishop d6, because I know now the king can't go back to c5, and if I ask myself, where is the king going to go next, I know that it's going closer to the edge of the board, either to c3 or to b5. Either way, I'm making progress. If the king could just stay on c4 and black could just keep passing, there would be no way to make this checkmate work, right? So it's really important that you remember that the king always has to make a move. So king c3. Now I hope you guys can guess this next move. If you need more time, pause the video. Bishop e6. Now I'm just taking away more and more squares from the king so that eventually it is forced to go into one of the four corners. Okay, let's say king d2, trying to get back in the center of the board. Now I'm going to play here, not allowing the king to stay in the center at all. if he goes to e1, then I'm going to bring my king in, and we've made tons of progress since the king is already on the edge of the board. So let's say the enemy is very resilient and he plays king c3. Now I'm just going to play back here. Now look, all these squares are being taken away from the king, and you can really see how easy it is to checkmate with the two bishops, right? Just continue to take away squares, and eventually the enemy will have nothing to do but to go back into the corner. The king comes to b3. I'm going to play king d3, right? As soon as you can get your king closer to the enemy king, it's probably a good idea to do so. Now the king is again forced to go closer to the corner. So let's say king goes to d2. And now we can give this check, right? The point is not to give the check, but we realize that the king cannot cross over to that side of the board and is forced to move closer to the edge, which is where we want the king to go. So king c2. Now, where does the king want to go? He wants to go here again, right? So how about bishop c4? Again, the two bishops are fantastic at creating this force field that stops the king from going anywhere. King b2. Now we can bring our king in, and the king is forced to the edge of the board, and now we can play here, controlling the square. King comes up, no problem. You can just play here. King goes back to c1, and our king gets into a great position. So the king is forced even farther into the corner, and now it's just a matter of precision and taking a little bit of care. The only way you can mess this up now is if you stalemate your opponent, right? If you get really careless and you do something like this. Stalemate, right? No good. You want to checkmate. So a great way to avoid that is to ask yourself a simple question. Again, where is my opponent going to go? So if you're considering this move and then you ask, where is he going to go? King a1. All right, great. And then if you want to play king c2 and you ask yourself, where is he going to go? You're not going to be able to come up with an answer because it's stalemate. So you've saved yourself from that embarrassing situation where you stalemate an opponent with two extra pieces, right? So again, a great way to avoid that is just ask yourself, where are they going to go? Now, in order to finish this off, all you need to do is bring your king even closer to the edge of the board. Okay, so this move was fine. And now you have to take a little bit of care. So you can just bring your bishop back. King is trapped, so he has to go to b1. And you bring your king over here. The king has to go to a1. And now we have a simple checkmate in 2. Great. Now that you watched me deliver this checkmate, I want you guys to review the video and then practice this on your own. Okay, just set up a board, give yourself 2 bishops, make moves for your opponent, right? Make them reasonable moves, keep the king in the center as long as you can, and then checkmate using your 2 bishops, right? If you practice this a couple of times, you should be able to do it in under 30 moves. Okay, the rules say you have up to 50 moves to checkmate before the game is a draw, but if you can do it under 30, you'll be in great shape and you'll never have to worry about that 50 move rule. That's pretty much all there is to it. Just remember a few basic things. Use all 3 of your pieces, including your king, to take away squares from the enemy. And constantly ask yourself, where is the king going to go next? That'll give you a big hint as to which squares you need to take away, and logically you'll be able to figure out how to force the king and push him further and further back into one of the corners, where you'll be able to checkmate him with the 2 bishops. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.